Hello, and welcome to Nostalgic Medicine, where we take a look at fascinating stories about the history of medicine and healthcare. Today's video will be on the history of fever. So your core body temperature is one of the key vital signs that we as doctors use in our day-to-day work, and they help us determine whether a person's body is still working as normal, and a fever is sometimes the first and probably the most obvious sign that someone is very unwell. And if you've ever read about or been taught about body temperature, then you would most likely have been told that 37 degrees Celsius is normal human body temperature and that anything higher than 38 represents a fever. But have you ever wondered where this value does come from and whether it even is correct? Well, I'm going to show you in this video where we can trace these values to, and it's thanks to the fascinating work of a single person. So to start off with, we need to answer what exactly is a fever. Well, you have this part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and it's responsible for controlling your body temperature at a specific set point, among its many other functions. But when infections or other causes of inflammation occurs, your body releases a bunch of chemicals called pyrogens, which the hypothalamus detects and causes it to increase your body temperature above this set point. It's important to distinguish a fever with hyperthermia, which is an uncontrolled increase of your body temperature due to things like heat or increased metabolism. Now, a lot of people say that a fever is useful because their extra body heat kills viruses and bacteria, but this might not actually be true according to the research, and no one really knows for sure why we get fevers. But for me personally as a doctor, I quite like fevers because it's a pretty easy way to tell that someone is unwell and requires urgent treatment. Fever has been known as either a sign of a disease or a disease process in its own right since ancient times. The Romans had a goddess of fever appropriately called Febris, and the famous Greek doctor Hippocrates associated fever with an excess of blood, the hot and moist humour, and he was also able to determine what kind of malaria a person had based on how the fever progresses over a few days. And for most of history, a fever was thought to be harmful and something that required urgent treatment. Hippocrates recommended bloodletting, and other remedies which were eventually used to try and treat fever included ice baths, brandy, quinine, and eventually aspirin from willow bark, and now we use paracetamol. The thing about fever is that despite it being a very obvious sign, measurement was quite imprecise, and it was previously done by simply placing your hand on a person's forehead, just like a mother would do to her sick child. But what if it was a hot or cold day, or the person just exercised? This would completely skew the measurement. But thankfully, this would all change when Galileo would invent the first thermoscope in 1593, and then Anders Celsius invented the Celsius scale, which was based on the boiling and melting point of water. But these old thermometers obviously weren't suitable for measurements on humans, but then a German doctor called Karl Wunderlich would change everything. Wunderlich developed a foot-long thermometer that took about 20 minutes to measure a patient's temperature, which contrasts to a few seconds that it takes nowadays. He claims to have taken multiple temperatures a day from 25,000 different patients, totaling to over 1 million measurements over the space of 18 years. And then he published a 500-page long book in 1871 called On the Temperature of Diseases, a manual of medical thermometry, which I like to think as being his grand unified theory of temperature. This book contains extremely detailed information about things like how temperature varies over a single day, that temperature changes based on your sex and age, and finally that different diseases cause different types of temperature curves, so that means that you can actually use a thermometer to fairly reliably diagnose specific infectious diseases. But probably the most important conclusion people were able to get from it was that a fever is not harmful in of itself, because the severity of a fever has no impact on how likely a person is to die. And this put an end to the long persistent myth that a fever in of itself is harmful. So that means that treating a fever and reducing body temperature itself makes no difference in the long term of a disease. No one knows exactly what calculations he used, but Wunderlich stated that average human temperature was 37 degrees, stating that, quote, "It is about 98.6 degrees in the well-closed axilla, and a few tenths of a degree higher in the rectum and vagina," which he didn't measure for obvious reasons. He also stated that a fever was at least 38 degrees Celsius. More recent analysis has shown that the thermometers Wunderlich used did overestimate temperature a little bit, and that normal body temperature is closer to 36.8 degrees, and that a fever is 37.7 degrees. But for someone using rudimentary instruments from the 1800s, I would say that he was close enough. And most importantly, he set the tone for human body temperature being one of the key vital signs that we use every day in medicine.